Your talk.
Yeah, I can start. Is it?
Yes, 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 sir. Please start.
I was waiting for Dr. Bansode.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank
I'm
you.
here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I mean, we are in the COVID hall.
yeah.
After a breakthrough, medical educators program by Dr. Amit Kos from Mayo, we are again back to COVIDs. And I'll just briefly go through the various guidelines that we have been, following. And certain things may be all known to you all. Certain things may be interesting. Now the title is a COVIDology, which is a new branch in, medicine. It's an acute manageable immunogenic, thrombogenic, inflammatory, viral, notifiable disease. The definition is by Dr. K.K. Agarwal, who is following me, who is there. And it is also called as multi-system inflammatory syndrome, MIS. These are the various timelines. It can be, there can be an incubation period about 27 days. All other things go fast to clinical phase and pulmonary phase, inflammatory phase and toxic phase. And as on date, we have about 12 crores of population in the world who have been infected with this disease. And the death rate is around 25 lakhs, 2.5 million death. And India ranks third. The incidence is more, but death rate is low. Clinically, we should be able to recognize. Now we have started our professional work. There may be many types of coughs and colds, and we should be able to differentiate between a corona and a non-corona clinically itself. And there can be a loss of smell. We call it as a nose corona, loss of taste, throat corona, or a shortness of breath, lung corona. But the major important thing as per AIMS guidelines is there can be a cough, sneezing, fever, cold. If it is associated with, breathlessness, with a dry nose and loss of smell and taste, we should vote for, COVID. These are the common investigations we do. I would like to stress a simple TCDC that we do it in a CBC when the NLR, neutrophil leukocyte rate, is more than 3.13. We should think that this patient has COVID. In every fever, we do that. And the critical issue in TCDC is a lymphopenia. And the lymphopenia also tells us the severity of the disease. These are the basic investigations. Beyond CBC, D-dimer, and serum ferritin, CRP, and procalcitonin, LDH, and IL-6 all have to be done to find out the activity and severity of the disease. All of them are elevated. And immunologically, we do an RT-PCR to confirm the diagnosis. Their most important thing is the cycle threshold number. Lesser the number, severe, we just say whether it is positive or negative, never accept it. You must ask for the CT value because you will be able to decide on the viral load. The lower the number, higher the viral load. That is very important. CBNAT, TrueNate can also be done, but very rarely done. Antigen can be a screening test. Antibodies, we'll come back to it late. Our Honorable Health Minister was talking about a rapid COT test, but it is yet to reach. Here, you try to compare the RT-PCR with IgG and IgM. When all the three are negative, the patient is not infected and he is at a risk. Probably he is an ideal candidate for today, immunization. When RT-PCR alone is positive, he is in active phase, clinical phase. When RT-PCR and M are positive, early infection. When only M is positive, again active early phase. M and G are positive, little late. All the three are positive, highly active. And when only IgG is positive, post-infection, immunized. He also should have a vaccine done, and an IgG titer is needed. And the IgG being raised is not an immunity passport. That is what I would like to stress here. We do commonly an X-ray chest in a cough. There are certain specific findings which can point to, this X-ray can be due to a COVID person. A reverse bat swing. We have the bat swing very classically in cases of pulmonary edema. All clinicians know that. When it is a reverse and when there are bilateral ball-like symptoms, signs, we should think that it could be a COVID. And coming to the severity, how the radiologist assess it, we have 3 lobes on the right side, 2 lobes on the left side, 5 lobes, and each lobe is, classified into 5 segments, thereby 25 can be there. And there are cohorts, they have, up to 3, this is non-specific. Can be COVID, may not be COVID. At 4, suspicion comes, and 5 is classical, and we need to correlate with RT-PCR. And based on the, lung involvement, we can divide it into mild, moderate, severe based on the score. There is also a statement from American Journal of Cardiology, CT is useless. It cannot differentiate between a flu pneumonia or ordinary pneumonia and COVID. But with our experience of nearly, 13, 14 months, I find CT is very much valuable, especially when it is beyond, cohort 3. And in the CT also, 2 things are very important, or 3 things. A ground glass haziness, a ground glass gasiness, and a reverse halo sign, and a crazy payment, something like payment, like that, they are very, very classical. And even if RT-PCR is negative, we need to give importance to it. I'll come back to you. There are many situations as clinicians we are facing. RT-PCR is negative. CT is positive. How to do that? Because RT-PCR need not be always positive. In the early stages, we take it from a swab from the nasal mucosa or nasopharynx or oropharynx. After 7 days, the virus enters into the lung. Therefore, we may miss it in an RT-PCR, smear. If you still want to confirm, you will have to go for a BAL, and you will have to do that. An RT-PCR negative does not rule out, COVID, provided CT is positive. Clinically, we need to concentrate on CT. These are the classifications based on the, various signs and symptoms and, investigations, which, all of us know. These are the various modalities we are utilizing it. Now we are all, well versed, versed with that. What I would like to stress here is oxygen, oxygen, oxygen. How oxygen, we'll see that. And these are the decisions which are taken up. Now the most preferred, decision in early cases is a home isolation, but importance is separate room, the separate toilet, and you must have a pulse oximeter with the patient. And when there is a dip, or when there are some weaknesses or, speech changes, patient should be referred to. And in a suspicious, case, RT-PCR is negative, do a CT. CT is negative, think about alternative. Positive, again go for, PCR. And if it is negative, positive, we treat it. In negative also, when there is a high suspicion, when the grade is beyond 3, 4 or 5, we call it by a name, COVID-like illness, CLI, like ILI. Therefore, never lose confidence on that. When there are minor cases, they are kept at home, and we need to follow them very clearly with oxygenation, and we need to start on early, antivirals. Can be, remdesivir or, favipiravir. And when there is a persistent fever unremitting, it has gone beyond 7 days, and patients' radiological signs do not come down, and CRP and ESR are elevated, think that it is COVID, and this is the time to start on steroids. There are many debates on steroids. Still, dexamethasone is good. Methylprednisolone can also be given, but it should be early. When there is a severe disease, we need to combine it with an antiviral. Very important is a remdesivir, and it should be combined with, anticoagulants and antiplatelets. Antiviral, steroids, and then anticoagulants, antiplatelets have to be started. I, for the one who would like to take a decision on the 3rd day of the patient, whether it is a COVID or non-COVID. If it is a RT-PCR negative, whether it is a COVID-like illness, I prefer to start on, I'll come to the next, doxycycline, ivermectin, and then remdesivir, steroids, and an antiplatelet, and low dose of heparin. Has to be started. And there is a very strong question why we are using antibiotics in COVID. Antibiotics are not virucidal. Antibiotics are used for two things. Number one, for their bacteriostatic or bactericidal effect on the secondary infection or super infection. But we are using certain antibiotics like azithromycin, doxycycline, which have been, well studied. Even today there was in our chief guest gave a trial report. And why we are using it? It is not for their, virucidal properties. It is for virustatic properties. Something like bacteriostatic, there is a virustatic. They prevent the entry of the virus into the cell, and the duplication is also being prevented. Therefore, viral load and infection is reduced. And they also have an effect on the host, that they enhance the immunity and they have a role to prevent the cytokine storm. That is why these two antibiotics, which are very popular, being used. Doxycycline, in addition, has been proved to be antiviral in dengue, anti-typhus in typhus fever, anti-parasite in malaria. Beyond antibiotics, this has got, all these effects. As I said, viral multiplication and the new cytokine storm are being prevented, and causes an apoptosis of the mast cells and activation of the protein kinase C. Thus, the level of circulating inflammatory agents are reduced. And hydroxychloroquine is one which is being recommended as a pre-exposure prophylaxis. Now the concept has given very clear. It has very little role in therapy, whereas pre-exposure prophylaxis, before vaccination, me and all our hospital staff were given it because it prevents the entry and multiplication of the virus into the cell, as well as it enhances the immunity. Therefore, this has got a role. The recovery trial September, which has been debated very much in BMJ, still supports a pre-exposure prophylaxis. We are still in the world, unless we are vaccinated, there is a role. Ivermectin, I think we had a good discussion with the Bangladesh study. Dr. K.K. Agarwal was also there. We had a video conferencing, and they supported. And now ICMR has started the ivermectin schedule from September 2020. APA has also endorsed a study, which has been supported by the Monash University. It is very useful in the prophylaxis and therapeutics, which we are using. If not, let us continue. Oxygen is a superhero. About all, if you want us to choose one, it is oxygen. When there is oxygenation is less than 94% pulse oximeter, the patient has to be started. These are the various methods by which oxygen can be started. A low flow, commonly we give it with the nasal catheter or from a reservoir, or a high flow, or a tent, or oxygen hood. Anything can be used. If you ask me to say which is the best, high flow nasal oxygen, that is the best, that has proved beyond doubt. Earlier all cases were put on ventilator because non-invasive ventilation never works, and invasive ventilations were put in that caused more lung damage. Now the high flow nasal oxygen has really given, very good efforts. Affects people on 30 liters, 40 liters, 70 liters of oxygen under pressure. It gives excellent result. In oxygen, the superhero is a high flow nasal oxygen, and we have non-invasive and then intubation, and we can even go for ECMO. These are all to combat and manage the hypoxemia. There is a new concept which has come. Even if the patient is not very much hypoxic, you can use a nocturnal oxygen therapy. It's an option today. It has got various scientific proofs here. It again disrupts the viral multiplication and improves the antiviral immune response, down regulates the ACE2 receptors, may halt the progression of COVID-19, which has been proved in the all hospitalized patients. Nocturnal oxygen. This is a system for oxygen therapy. When the room air, when the oxygenation is less than 94%, nasal cannula, high flow, and then ventilator, and then ECMO. These are the certain risk factors. When you see a patient with these risk factors, you will have to be more careful. Aged persons who are living closer to a facility, cardiovascular disease, cancer, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and then CVD. All these things have effect on the outcome of the disease. These patients, you will have to be very, very careful on that. These are the complications. We have seen it. We are all now well versed. One thing I would like to say is about the Lancet article, virus can be present in the skin. It need not be present elsewhere. Still, it is possible. And second thing I would like to stress is the complications are immediate and delayed. Now, late complications are due to pulmonary fibrosis or a vascular thrombogenic. You can have a stroke or acute coronary syndrome, and a reinfection is also possible. Coming to vaccine, earlier before the vaccine became a reality, a lot of work has been done on MMR, oral polio, and BCG, flu, and pneumococcal vaccines. There was a recommendation. People who have not had the vaccine as a child can always, have it. Now we are into a vaccine reality. 3 major types of the vaccine. In India, we have Covaxin and Covishield vaccine. And now these 2 vaccines have given a lot of benefit. And we'll have to go for either Covaxin or Covishield. Now there is a recent study that Covaxin 2 days ago, it has been proved 81% protection is there, and multiple strains, mutant strains can also be countered here. Now vaccine is available, it is safe, and we need to adopt it. And a lung damage is much. We may need a lung transplant, which has been done in Hyderabad for the first time in India and has been done many a times in Mumbai, in Chennai also. Now the recent observation, 2-3 things are there. Steam is found to be, very effective. Saliva RT-PCR is also coming up. Chlorpheniramine as a nasal spray is very, good. When there is a cardiac patient, a hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin have bad effect on the, heart. One pulmonologist has recommended methylene blue in various ways, sublingual and nebulization. He has done this in, miliary tuberculosis and COPD. Now he has proved its effectiveness. And in COVID, now the learning points are steroids. When the patient is positive with hypoxia, we need to never withhold. Antiviral, when there is a moderate to severe disease, never withhold. Anticoagulation, when the DMR is high, D-dimer is high, we should not withhold. Tocilizumab and other convalescent plasma, when inflammatory markers are going on rising, in spite of steroid antiviral, this has a role. Though much has been debated, clinically we support it. These are the red flags in COVID, when there is a fever, going on rising 101, 103, persistent cough after 3 days, sudden onset of shortness of breath, rapid rise of CRP, lung involvement in CT more than 50%, altered sensorium, should put you on your guard, and very, aggressive therapy has to be there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a few conclusions are decisive. And on the clinical features, corona is not a lung disease. Remember, it's a thromboinflammatory disease, and the virus is non-replicating after day 9. Fever and rise of CRP and then cough, persistent cough, should make you to think that patient has got a pneumonia. Day 5 is the day in critical phase, and day 19 is the day after which COVID ends. Loss of smell, when it is there, first vote for, COVID, and 15 minutes is the time. Contact between an infected person or infected place, 15 minutes is the time. On the investigations, as we discussed, CT scan is the need. RT-PCR is the need. Markers are the need. That anything negative, CT positive, always give weightage. And antibodies are done, periodically to find out a repeat exposure. And 6-minute walk test is very much, important. You can always fix it up, and the patient has got a lung involvement. Toilets are recognized as COVID chambers. Coming to the treatment, home isolation is the modality today, and remdesivir to all patients have to be given, anticoagulants and immunosuppressants, and then tocilizumab must be considered. Zinc is the mineral. There are a lot of studies on that, and always keep in mind other thromboembolic diseases like acute coronary syndrome or a stroke. Oxygen is a superhero which we have seen. Coming to the prevention, the diseases are, we can use a protective zero power eyeglass, or you will have to use a 3-layered nasal mask. That a nasal, a layered mask has to be there. Hydroxychloroquine or ICMR recommended ivermectin has to be taken. Today, vaccine is available, safe, and adopt. These are the few finer, learning points. What I would like to say is, diabetes can be there, he can get a COVID. Diabetes can be aggravated by the disease or by the drug. Secondly, can be new onset. Therefore, keep an eye on that. Drug of choice is insulin. Though there are many debates on, oral hypoglycemic agent like metformin and DP4, drug of choice is only, insulin. Secondly, AC inhibitors can be used safely or calcium channel blockers in hypertension control. The radiological resolution will take some time. When will we make you fit for a procedure? There is a coronary artery disease patient and we have managed him. It can be due to COVID or it can be due to atherosclerosis. His PCI cannot be postponed. There is an emergency surgery as we do before surgery, HIV or hepatitis B surface, and this has to be done. When it is positive, you need to see that RT-PCR becomes negative, immunological markers become negative, then he should be given permission to go ahead with the surgery or a procedure. And usually, group O is resistant, A and B are vulnerable. COVID patient cannot spread the virus after 14 days. Therefore, after 14 days, you can be very safe with the patient. These are a few COVID learnings on the health system. Outbreaks, epidemics, pandemics are a reality, and being prepared is the best strategy. We all suffered a lot. Today we are settled, organized earlier. That could have been abated if you have a better preparedness. Health is much more than medical care or treatment of the sick people. Strengthening the health system is not adding hospital beds. Non-pharmacological interventions are equally and more effective. Need of the hour is we need to strengthen health system and chemoprophylaxis and encouragement of the doctors and healthcare workforce in whatever way it is possible. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you all have a COVID vaccine and booster, but still mask is the vaccine, hand wash is the medicine, distancing is the immunity, early detection and effective treatment are the key. Now we are into a new normal. COVID has put us into a new normal. There are now 3 eras. One is before COVID. We have seen that. During COVID, we are living at it. After COVID also, we need to plan. That is a new normal. This is a sad reality of COVID as far as the doctors are concerned. But we are all determined to face this challenge and see that the health of the health workforce, doctors, health workforce, and the citizen are taken care of. Thank you. Thank you very much for our active listening. Dr. Bansode, you are muted. You need to unmute and speak. We are not able to hear you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Yes.
Very excellent disposition of the corona. Just before asking anybody the question, I would like to ask you, if a lady is pregnant in early phase, the allopathic treatment is usually contraindicated and non-pharmacological measures we advocate. Does the oxygen therapy helps in that case?
See, pregnancy, whether we should avoid steroids and heparin is one thing. Still, it is debated. We need to discuss, we need to take a decision one-to-one, case to case. If that lady wants to continue the pregnancy with the risk, we need to take these drugs. And otherwise, her life will be at risk. And oxygen therapy has to be done. Now, a lot of studies are going on pregnant women and lactating women. How the virus. Virus earlier they said it doesn't go to the child. Now there are evidences that a newborn child has got a, virus detected. Therefore, it's still in a debatable one. What I for the one will decide is discuss with the family. She wants to go away, do away with the pregnancy, excellent. Wants to continue, let her take the risk and continue the therapy with all risks involved in it, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Agrawal, can you?
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah.
Should I start? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bansore, and thank you, my mentor, Dr. Arul Rajaj, who is also my past president, under whose leadership I learned a lot when I was the national president of Indian Medical Association. So I'm going to show you the slides. I'm going to cover up from where Dr. Arul Raj started. And so I'm going to basically concentrate on some basics of low-grade systemic inflammation before, during, and after COVID. So low-grade systemic inflammation means CRP more than 1. If you have low-grade systemic inflammation before the COVID, what will happen? With the COVID, what will happen? And after the COVID, what will happen? And this is what I'm repeating what Dr. Arul Raj said, which I send it every day in the morning. It is acute, means 3 months. It is manageable. So now we know the management, which has been discussed by Dr. Arul Raj. It is inflammation, and that inflammation is induced by immunological reaction leading to hypercoagulative stage. It is contagious. It is novel, new. It is a viral. It is a disease. It's not a syndrome. So when it is a syndrome, you know there is no mechanism. In a disease, we know exact mechanism. So therefore, and today our topic is that part of this virus, that is inflammatory part of the virus. So we are focusing on inflammatory part of the virus and not others. And inflammation is linked to thrombosis. Now, when you have let me take about, because at this moment, everybody is worried about the vaccine. So this vaccine teaches us much more about the inflammation than the natural virus. So this is called as vaccine-induced muscle COVID, because I'm introducing a DNA which converts into RNA, which produces spike protein, which produces spike. So when the vaccine enters my body, it can produce Th1 IgE anaphylaxis within 15 to 30 minutes. That's not inflammation. So that is not inflammation I'm talking about. It may produce a complement-mediated response after few hours. That's not inflammation. That is non-IgE-mediated allergy. It may produce a T cell response, which is a cell-mediated response after 3 days. That is not inflammation. So these 3 are responses when the virus or the protein has still not entered into the cell. So there is a reaction of the body to remove that virus while it has not yet entered the cell. Therefore, there is IgE-mediated Th1 response, complement-mediated Arthus non-IgE reaction, or a third-day-mediated T cell response. What we are talking about, reactogenicity, which is when the protein enters the cell or the virus enters the cell, it produces Th1 response, that is T helper 1 response, or Th2 response, but not IgE, but IgG mediated. It files an FIR called memory cells, T cells, and B cells. it produces gamma interferon, it produces TNF alpha, IL-6 and IL-beta. And then comes is after 7 days, the immunogenic response, which can produce 3 types of antibodies: corrupt antibodies, Nikambi or inactive antibodies, and Singham or neutralizing antibodies. Now, presence of corrupt or inactive antibodies can cause inflammation in a post-COVID phase. Reactogenic will be the COVID inflammation. So we are talking about 2 types of inflammation: the COVID phase inflammation, which is the reactogenicity when the virus is there in the body, and a post-COVID recurrent inflammation because of presence of corrupt, that is disease-enhancing antibodies, inactive, which are non-neutralizing antibodies, that means not enough neutralizing antibodies. So I must know the structure of the virus, and I must know which part of the virus causes inflammation. I know the spike protein allows me to enter the cell. But unless I know which part of my virus produces inflammation, I will not be able to attack that. Unfortunately, most of the work is on commercial basis. They are working on vaccine production. They are not working on which part of my body produces inflammation. So remember here, there is ORF1A, ORF1B. It has 16 non-structural proteins. In ORF1B, there is a non-structural protein 14, which causes the proofreading. So if there is a mutation in ORF14, then mutations will increase. Then it has a spike protein, and that has a non-spike structural and special proteins. Then the spike protein has S1 and S2. In S1, we have SP, the S terminal, and the CP. And after that, we have from 13 to 318 amino acid N-terminal domain, and then RBD and RBM. The focus today is only on RBM and RBD. All the vaccine and neutralizing antibodies are being directed towards RBM and RBD, and we are neglecting NTD, and that may be responsible for vaccine failures, and that may be responsible for post-vaccine severe reactions which we may get. So we will try to explain 2 situations. One, a MBBS doctor who died after 20 days of vaccine, what might have happened. And yesterday, a Maharashtra 40-year-old male died within 15 minutes of taking the vaccine. That was anaphylaxis. That was not inflammation. But this doctor dying after 20 days of the first infection would mean that he had developed either inactive antibodies or he had developed corrupt antibodies, that after he developed infection, the infection was very severe and he could not be survived. Now, this is what I mean by non-IgE mediated allergy. This is a lady post liver transplant. The vaccine was given yesterday evening at 6 p.m. Today morning, she developed a classical angioneurotic edema. This is what I call them as 3rd, 4th, and 5th day. You can see allergic reactions like in Montague's text. These are not inflammation. This is T cell mediated inflammation in the local site. This is not local inflammation. This is T cell mediated immunity. Now, just now, let us see, Dr. Arul Raj has shown this slide. He can be seen sitting here. He said age more than 65. He said chronic lung disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer, hypertension, overweight, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease, cerebrovascular disease, dementia, tobacco use. And I'm leaving pregnancy and thalassemia because those are query. What is common between all of them? Only one thing: low-grade systemic inflammation. All of them have underlying low-grade systemic inflammation. And when you have underlying low-grade systemic inflammation, when the virus comes, it will convert them into overt, from silent to overt inflammation, and that is called Th1 response. So the Th1 response, if you don't have a low-grade underlying low-grade systemic inflammation, nothing will happen to you. So therefore, all those cases whose CRP is less than 1 on day 0 will not develop significant systemic Th1 response inflammation. But if your CRP is more than 1, higher the baseline CRP, more will be the Th1 reactogenic response to the virus as well as the vaccine. Now, there are more than 30 people who have died in India after the vaccine, and most of them have died because of cardiac complication. These were reactogenicity. That means all these people might have had a CRP more than 1. They developed acute inflammatory thrombogenic response, precipitated MI in susceptible individuals. So this tells us the importance of low-grade systemic inflammation pre-COVID. So low-grade will become overt, 0 will become low-grade. And that's the reason only those people, all these cases have only one thing in common, and that's CRP more than 1 and less than 10. If the CRP is more than 10, they will have overt inflammation somewhere in the body. But a CRP of less than 1, between 1 and 10, these are the conditions where you will get. Now, this is what different areas in the virus which can cause worst. I'll quickly do that. You can see mutation region is ORF1b, mutation is in ORF3, and then mutation is in S protein. These are different types of mutations occurring. That is not the subject. But in each mutation, I have to see whether are they going to be more inflammatory or not. See, mutation can make them more immunogenic, less immunogenic, more inflammatory, and more contagious. So we are looking for will the mutations make them more inflammatory or not. This is the NTD area, that is this is N-terminal domain, R1, R2, R3, and R4. These are mutations in this particular areas will make them more contagious and less inflammatory. And therefore, less inflammatory means NTD mutations. Now, this is a copy which people should keep. What part of the virus causes what? Now, all the studies have been done to find out the replication or the proofreading. Nobody has worked on their inflammatory status. This says non-structural proteins causes viral replication, proofreading, suppress cellular immunity, but nobody is talking about their inflammatory status. So even now we don't know what causes inflammation except for nucleocapsid, which causes interferon resistance. Except for nucleocapsid. So the nucleocapsid part of the virus causes interferon resistance, and ORF 6, 7A, 7B, 8A, 8B, 9B suppresses cellular immunity, which will cause more inflammation in the body. Now, this is what I'm talking about, RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which has NSP14, which causes more mutations. Now, these are the 3 types of responses in my body. This is a slide from Dr. R.K. Sanghvi. Either body will produce pro-inflammatory or inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. Now, when I say low-grade systemic inflammation, these are the people who have pro-inflammatory state in the body. They will have increased chemokines, ILS, TNF, and interferon baseline. So this pro-inflammatory state, diabetes is a pro-inflammatory state, will become inflammatory or anti-inflammatory response. So what I am talking about is a pro-inflammatory state in the body is called low-grade systemic inflammation. During COVID, it will turn up into an inflammatory response, and post-COVID, it will come back to pro-inflammatory. So therefore, most of the post-COVID symptoms are persistent inflammation because the patient has a pre-COVID pro-inflammatory phase. Most of the post-COVID symptoms you will see in people whose CRP persists more than 1. The body will have 4 responses. The first response will be interferon. So there are 4 types of inflammatory responses. Interferon, on the very first day, mild fever. TNF, local response, high-grade fever. Interleukin, systemic response. And colony stimulating factor, the healing response. So whenever there is an inflammation in the body, you will have an interferon response on day 1. TNF response, high-grade fever, more than 100, so 101. Interleukin response, which is a persistent fever lasting for 6 months, and a M2 macrophage response leading to CSF. Now, quickly, let me coming back to, these are the various cells which are acting in the body, but here what it happens. So if the virus attacks my cells, it will produce interferon 1, which will produce interferon gamma, and this interferon gamma will kill the virus. That's a normal response. And if this interferon response is resistant like a nuclear capsid, then it will produce interferon gamma and it will cause inflammation. So the first response of inflammation in my body is a interferon 1 response. That means if my CRP is already high, this gamma interferon will exaggerate my inflammation. Or my body will produce IL-6, TNF alpha, IL-8, and through macrophages, it will produce IL-1 beta and IL-18. Therefore, if I have a baseline CRP more than 1, they will exaggerate and convert my CRP to more than 10 by day 2. So a CRP of more than 10 on day 2 means you have exaggerated inflammatory response. It means you already have an underlying low-grade systemic inflammation. We are treating them with steroids and not waiting for hypoxia to develop. We are giving steroids at this stage. CRP more than 10 is an indication for steroid to prevent them from going into hypoxia. Now, this, when Dr. Arul Raj talked about bradykinin, that is working at the level of ACE2 receptors to bradykinin. IL beta is responsible for high ferritin levels, and IL-1 beta is responsible for inflammation in the lungs due to a hyaline membrane. Now, if I want to attack this inflammation, if I am attacking IL-1 beta, I need mefenamic acid or colchicine. If I am attacking IL-18 or TNF alpha or IL-16, I need tocilizumab to attack IL-16. For TNF, I need a steroid. Therefore, it cannot be one answer to one patient. I have to decide on a case-to-case basis. Do I need to reduce IL-6? Do I need to reduce TNF blocker? Do I need to reduce bradykinin? Do I need to reduce IL-1 beta, or do I need to reduce IL-18? There are classical markers of inflammation. IL-1 beta will cause high ferritin levels. IL-8 will cause very high NLR ratio, neutrophilic migration. TNF alpha will be a very high grade fever, and IL-6 will be a low grade fever. Accordingly, I can decide which drugs to be given in inflammation. Apart from that, this is how NK nuclear factor kappa beta transcription pathway enters into the inflammation. And here lots of plant medicines and mefenamic acid come into the play, including in nuclear factor kappa beta kinase. We are today talking about the artesunenic acid, which is being given for malaria, inhibits the NF kappa beta pathway inflammation. This is arachidonic acid pathway, prostaglandin pathway, which shows there is some role of leukotriene inhibitors and some role of mefenamic acid. Now these are to control my inflammation. I can block my 1 cytokine, 2 cytokine, multiple cytokine, lymphocyte trafficking inhibitor, lymphocyte retention inhibitor, lymphocyte egression, increasing anti-inflammatory cytokine, and small molecule oral therapies. These are various types of inflammations. Now, these are various drugs acting at various cytokines. Again, various drugs acting at various cytokines. This is M1 versus M2 macrophage, where it shows if you convert M1 into M2 macrophage, inflammation will go away. So let me come back to the word pre-COVID low-grade systemic inflammation. If my CRP is less than 1, I have low-grade chances of coronary artery disease, inflammation in my body. 1 to 3, moderate risk. 3 to 10, high risk. More than 10, I have overt inflammation. Less than 0.65, normal. 0.65 to 1, metabolic syndrome. And if it is more than third or more than 10 on third day, it means pneumonia. So when this CRP is low-grade inflammation, it will cause inflammation in 4 things in the body. So whenever there is a low-grade systemic inflammation, it will cause inflammation in the adipose tissue, muscle, liver, and pancreas. Therefore, we are getting new onset diabetes. We are getting new onset liver inflammation. We are getting severe muscle pains, and we are getting severe adipose tissue involvement because of this. So this low-grade systemic inflammation is always diagnosed in these 4 areas: adipose tissue, muscle, liver, and pancreas. Therefore, whenever you develop an inflammation because of COVID or vaccination, these are the 4 locations where you will get a precipitation of inflammation. So it will cause liver, skeletal muscle, it will cause sarcopenia. This is in the pancreas, it causes inflammation. In the heart, now before I come back to the heart, there are 4 factories of inflammation in my body. I've already talked about the effect will be in adipose tissue, pancreas, muscle, and liver. But where are the cytokines are predominantly present? They are in the eyes. So therefore, we are getting eye manifestations. They are in the skin. So we are getting lots of skin manifestations. They are in the small GI. So they are causing lots of GI manifestations. They are in the blood. It is causing anemia. They are in the gallbladder. It is causing perigallbladder edema. They are in the liver, and they are in the heart. Now you see here, kidney is not involved. So they are not causing primary kidney disease. The brain is not there. They are not causing a primary brain inflammation. All other organs are involved secondarily. Therefore, inflammation will start in the eyes or skin or GI or blood or gallbladder or liver or the heart. It will manifest more in the adipose tissue, pancreas, muscle, and liver. And you can see the day before yesterday story about the heart.
Hello, excuse me, Dr.
Yes,
Agrawal.
it is over.
Yeah.
So
Please,
remember on the last slide is, if you have a microalbumin in the urine, if your CRP is more than 1, if your 6-minute walk test is less than 200 meters, you are at risk of inflammation. This was the last slide.
thank you, Dr. Agrawal. You have given the inflammatory process, how it goes in COVID on the skeletal muscle as well as liver, so the new onset of diabetes, etc. is there. Excellent and exposition of that. Now I'll request Dr. Alka Deshpande, who is another expert in dual, that is HIV and COVID, is going to speak on that. May I request Dr. Alka Deshpande to continue? Dr. Alka Deshpande?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Just 1 minute. Thank you, Chairperson. I will be speaking on AIDS and COVID challenges for physicians. Now, the first COVID patients were reported in India in January 2020. As SARS and COVID pandemic was unfolding, that reminded me of 1990 when I started the first outpatient clinic dedicated to HIV/AIDS in JJ Group of hospitals. There was a lot of stigmatization, there was panic all around, there was uncertainty, and there was fear of death. And the same scenario was now seen with SARS-CoV pandemic, which was ongoing. The diagnostic test for HIV, I'm talking about early days, because HIV had a prolonged incubation period, large number of the patients remained asymptomatic for years together. And then when they were asked to get tested, there was reluctance because the testing was equal to admitting risk behavior. In those days, there was a single test which was to be confirmed by Western blot. And there were a lot of results which were confusing, and there were intermediate Western blot positive, and therefore we could not make head or tail of it. Slowly we evolved with the epidemic. We started understanding it better. As the understanding improved, our management and approach to the patient improved. In COVID-19, the same thing has happened. Initially, there was absolute reluctance to get the test done because in those days we had a quarantine. The patient and patient families were moved to the quarantine centers. They were kept in the different places, and therefore people were scared of this disease. There was lack of infrastructure. There was a lot of social stigma. And of course, in the beginning, there was a dilemma of interpretation of the test results. Now, as I'm going to talk to my physician colleagues about the challenges they will face, let me just bring to their notice the pre-COVID scenario. You know, the free ART program started by Government of India in 2004. 40%, this is a quick survey I have done of Mumbai ART centers, different centers, and I found that 40% of the patients who are on ART for more than 15 years. That means we have added 15 years to their life. The longevity has increased, and now they are in the age group of 45 to 59 years. As such, because of the age, there is increase in non-communicable diseases. 20% are having type 2 diabetes, 18 to 20% are having hypertension and coronary heart disease. The medical officer in ART is trained only for ART management, and therefore all this workload is going to come to the physicians, and the physicians have to keep in mind the drug interactions with antiretroviral therapy. I would like to just highlight two areas for the physicians: that primary pulmonary hypertension is increasingly recognized complication since 1987 in HIV, 1,000-fold more common in HIV. Pulmonary artery pressure more than 30 is found in 35% of the patients, and mortality 50% at 1 year. Similarly, dilated cardiomyopathy, 10% of the HIV cases come with DCM. HIV per se is the cause, secondary infecting agents, nutritional deficiencies. But what is most important is cytokine imbalance between these. And therefore, dilated cardiomyopathy is again becoming challenging with management in HIV. So the physician should be aware of these two conditions. As the COVID epidemic started, we had lockdown. In fact, the lockdown was all around the world in all the countries. This was an evolving pandemic, which was something like a national emergency, though it was not declared as an emergency. The only thing at our hand was medical management. Whatever symptoms and whatever we could discern from the clinical features of the patient, we were managing that. So the medical management was crucial. This epidemic severely interrupted HIV care delivery because many countries converted ART centers for SARS-CoV management. For example, Egypt and many Eastern and Central European countries used ART centers for COVID management. All the attention was given to COVID. The personnel and resources were diverted to COVID. Workforce from ART center was mobilized only for COVID. Medical consignments of the ART were stuck in procurement because of the transportation problems. As a result, 19% of HIV patients were unable to get ART refills. The Lancet HIV recently reported that HIV patients in Egypt are petrified to go for their ART refills because only the HIV treatment centers in Egypt have been converted to COVID-19 quarantine and treatment facilities. Just imagine, not only panic and stigma, but this was their genuine difficulty of getting a fear of infection, visiting a place which is for quarantine. There was no transportation, the shops were closed, monitoring of patients became difficult both for RVD and non-communicable diseases. As a result, when the patients started coming after the lockdown was lifted, there was a decline in CD4, which naturally indicated therapy failure. And therapy failure means these people would develop opportunistic infections. As at the same time, the therapy failure also indicated some amount of HIV drug resistance. However, most of the countries do not have routine facility for identifying drug resistance in these patients. What was the Indian scenario during lockdown? Our ART centers were functioning, thanks to NACO. The medical staff was permitted to commute with their own vehicles. So the doctors and some paramedical staff was attending the ART center. Patients were instructed to attend the nearest ART center. Although the patients have reluctance to attend the nearest ART center because of fear of identification, there was no other option, and therefore some of the people really attended, but the other patients walked down 7 to 8 kilometers to collect their medicines. Still, attendance was 65 to 70%. So what happened to the remaining 30%? It's very difficult. I tried to collect the data from our AIDS Control Society, but they have not looked at this from this point of view. Do you remember the big exodus of the migrant laborers from Mumbai in the beginning of epidemic? So many of our patients must have migrated, and we don't have any data on these people. It would be interesting to know how many of them were compliant and non-compliant with ART therapy. This I would like to bring to your notice. This is a report from Singapore, and 2 patients were both positive for COVID and HIV. Further testing showed that HIV was false positive. And the researchers have shown that the HIV and SARS-CoV viral proteins shared sequence motif and a certain degree of homology in their proteins. Now, this is an area worth carrying out the research, because there are many other substances which have a false positivity with HIV combo test. Combo is antibody plus P24 antigen. Epstein-Barr metastatic cancers, interfering substances like rheumatoid factor, anti-HCV antibodies. And therefore, COVID and HIV antibody results coming positive together need to be reconfirmed. Otherwise, we will be falsely labeling a patient as HIV and starting the treatment. So please do reconfirmation with the advanced test. The antiretroviral drugs like tenofovir, lopinavir were shown anti-COVID activity in vitro. And therefore, people thought that if the patient is receiving ART containing TDF and lopinavir, the SARS-CoV infection may not be serious. In fact, there was a hypothesis that immune suppression may be protective against severe clinical manifestation. Activation of immune system, especially T cells, which you have been hearing just now, enhances the lung injury. So it is immunogenic. But Jube et al., in addition to lung histopathology, they found hyperactivated state of peripheral CD4 cells with increased concentration of highly pro-inflammatory CCR6 positive Th17 in CD4 cells. Overactivation of T cells possibly accounts for severe immune injury of the lungs. And therefore, as a corollary, they said, immune suppression in HIV may be protective. However, this view is not endorsed by many other researchers. However, the data is scanty. HIV infected individual might be at an increased risk as expected for COVID infection or severe disease, especially if the individual is having comorbidities. As I said, 20% patients are now having non-communicable diseases. Lower CD4 cell count. Now, lower CD4 cell count also spells that there will be a high viral load. And you all know that both HIV and COVID virus are RNA viruses. There will be unsuppressed HIV RNA viral load that also a contributing factor for the severe disease. Regular ART, particularly with protease inhibitors and tenofovir and other drugs, higher CD4 count, suppress viral load, the risk of infection and clinical severity may be modified. May be modified because we are still lacking a concrete data to confirm this. HIV does not offer protection from COVID. This is now accepted. Vulnerability is increased, particularly if the CD4 is low. Low CD4 also spells for worst outcome and therapeutic approach. But remember, whether it is HIV, COVID, the therapeutic approach remains the same as in general population. Data is scarce. Immunodeficiency may increase the vulnerability. There are two large studies in United Kingdom. PLHS had 63 to 130% higher risk of dying from COVID. It is further contributed by comorbidity. So everywhere it is comorbidity which is enhancing the risk. Low CD4 count increase the mortality. The drawback of this study are that these are the studies carried out only in hospitalized patients. There was no control group. And in the hospitalized patient, the patients who had severe disease only were hospitalized. The large US study did not find increased risk of severe illness in presence of HIV. There is only one study coming from India, that is record-based retrospective study from Tamil Nadu. But it is a study only of 6 cases, 5 cases had mild symptoms, 1 asymptomatic, all recovered. So we need more and more data to come to any conclusion. There are other studies which have been reported in medical literature. UK showed 101 cases, USA 122, Spain and Germany 56, 33 and so on. So total 323 documented cases of PLHS with SARS-CoV-2. I would like to draw your attention that 237 of these cases had at least one morbidity, comorbid condition, at least one. So they may be having more. The 244 cases were on ART and 216 had a viral load quite well suppressed, less than 50 copies. In these cases, 82% recovered and 14% expired. So HIV really increases the risk to a certain extent, but taken proper care, I think recovery rate also will be good. The case fatality in hospitalized patients as against in UK and USA was 26% and 21%. But these are the reports of around May and June 2020. So after that, our understanding of COVID also has increased. Our management has become better. And therefore, I think the results will be better in now the papers which will come. HIV SARS-CoV-2, the morbidity is determined by age. That is like any general population. So it is determined by age, comorbidities, and control of HIV infection. The mortality variability is based on ethnicity. That is an important factor. Health facilities which are available, because we can't compare the health facilities of the developing world with the developed world, and poor documentation. Now, Africa is a continent of HIV. However, the documentation of COVID and HIV is so poor that hardly there are 2 or 3 cases which have been reported. I would just like to draw your attention that British HIV Association guidelines have pointed out that CD4 count may fall during COVID-19. If it is less than 200, please start chemoprophylaxis to these cases. Coming to COVID vaccine for HIV, there will be a lot of debate because they are immune deficient, immune suppressed, but they have to be protected. As per our present guidelines, people above the age of 60, so HIV aged more than 60, should be given the vaccine. HIV with comorbid conditions above the age of 45. Vaccination is advocated in HIV patients. Antibody response is to be studied. So this will be one good research area, particularly for my postgraduate student. They can take up this and find out. Years ago, I had done a study on anti-rabies vaccine, and we had given it to the HIV positive and the controlled group or a normal people. So in the HIV positive, although they reached the protective threshold, the antibody titer was much less compared to the control group. However, it was protective. So similarly, we will have to study the response to COVID vaccine in presence of HIV, and naturally multiple variables will be present, but it would be worth doing a study. For the physicians, we'll have to disseminate the scientific information. We'll have to answer the patient's queries, and the side effects with this vaccine we'll have to manage because they can't be managed at the ART center. So in conclusion, I would just say that we require a large data is necessary, and therefore documentation is necessary. My appeal to all physicians and the students, the residents, that they should document each patient of HIV with COVID-2 with all the details of the clinical profile, the CD4 count, viral load, and the management and the response. HIV immune suppression has not shown to be protective. However, T cell function needs further studies because it would be very, very interesting to know, since it is also an immunogenic disease. So what will be the dynamics of the T cells and the viral dynamics? Here in this case, the dynamics both of HIV and COVID-19. The management of HIV and non-HIV COVID-19 is same, so there should not be a change. And COVID vaccine is advocated for people living with HIV/AIDS. This is what I could share with you, but I appeal to all that please document these cases and generate data. There is large number of research areas in PLHAs with COVID. So I think it will be quite challenging for our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam,
Thank
for
you, sir.
sharing your experience in the HIV and COVID cases. I think in all the three speakers, our president, Dr. Arun Raj, gave the throw the light on COVIDology and clinical diseases. He has given the very lucid description in a simple language, though we are suffering or seeing the sufferings from COVID cases since last 1 year, but he gave very excellent exposition of COVID. Dr. K.K. Agrawal gave the inflammatory challenges at various places in COVID, the development of new onset of diabetes, as well as the new inflammatory markers, etc. And Dr. Alka Deshpande has given the dual combination of HIV and COVID in a very simple language. Because of paucity of time, I am ending this session here. I'll request all the delegates, please give a big round of applause for all the three speakers, expert in their field and sharing their experience with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
over to next session.